Beautiful like a fresco and fascinating for its idiosyncrasies, Street Fighter III Third Strike is a melting pot of both popular culture and fighting game design. This is the Annotated Third Strike. Poor Sean. The student of series mainstay Ken Masters, Sean takes a lot of lumps. He's still in training, so attacks like a consistent Hadouken seem to elude him, as indicated by some of his context-specific win quotes in Second Impact. His dream of being a champion fighter on par with his teacher frequently falls short, too, as indicated by his endings in both the previous game when he takes on Ryu, and here in Third Strike when he gets knocked out of a qualifying round for a large martial art tournament. Sean is the underdog. He's not a great fighter, and he's often the put-upon contender against impossible odds. Funny enough, this is by design. Street Fighter III series producer Tomoshi Sadamoto confirmed in an interview with the Capcom Fighters Network portal that Sean was always meant to be a handicap character, or in his words, a compatibility character. He went on to say that skill gaps between players became more of a concern post-Street Fighter II, and since we already mentioned that getting new players to come into the Street Fighter III games was a concern from the beginning, having a handicapped character like Sean that a high-level player could use when facing opponents that were still learning was implemented fairly early on. His status as a student was something of an in-game way of explaining away any weaknesses he has. But let's talk about some of that backstory. According to official materials like Street Fighter Eternal Challenge, Sean hails from Brazil with some Japanese ancestry on his father's side. A natural athlete, Sean played basketball in college before convincing Ken to train him. Through his single-player campaign, he even catches up with his instructor for a match while also making a reference to the fact that Third Strike takes place a year after Second Impact, something that will come up again in various subtle ways as the series moves forward.
You win. Prepare to strike now.
He's voiced in New Generation and Second Impact by veteran game and anime voice actor Isshin Chiba, whom is perhaps most famous for his portrayal as Jin Kazama in the various Tekken games and their spin-offs. In Third Strike, the actor changed to another anime mainstay, Mitsuo Iwata, whom among various other roles was the original actor to play Kaneda in Katsuhiro Otomo's seminal film Akira. His stage is set during the day on the dock of a harbor. He shares this with countryman Oro, though Sean has the freighter Obrigado Eldora in his background, a name that translates into English as Thank You Eldora from Portuguese. It seems that the ship is being loaded with coffee brought in by trucks from the very on-the-nose Brazilian cafe. This makes sense, as the South American country is responsible for about a third of the world's coffee supply, which makes coffee its largest export by a wide margin. The name Sean is a bit out of character for Capcom. Most Street Fighter characters that are tied to countries of origin are generally given a first name that's traditionally indigenous. Sean, though, is of Gaelic origin, somewhat akin to John in English or Jean in Norman French, and more commonly found in northwestern European nations such as Ireland or Wales before it migrated further west over time. In Gaelic, it roughly translates into God is gracious, but its Christian connotation is probably not what Capcom designers had in mind when they named him. Sean is often called the poor man's Shoto, and this refers to his place as one of the various Shoto clones in the overall Street Fighter franchise. That ultimately means that he's a head and palette swap of series protagonists Ryu and Ken, albeit with different overall movesets. The term Shoto clone is interesting though, especially given that it's widely accepted as a false statement that North American players continue to use regardless of accuracy. In series lore, Ryu and Ken trained with a man named Goken, whom originally appeared in Masao Mikanzaki's Street Fighter II Ryu manga from 1993 to 1994. This character was accepted into series canon in Akuma's ending in Street Fighter Alpha in 1995, along with his own teacher Gotetsu. Gotetsu originated a martial art form known as an Ansatsuken, which translates into Assassin's Fist according to the Street Fighter wiki on fandom.com. This means that the style had no formal name, only that it was a martial art based on killing techniques. For Street Fighter II's international release, though, series developer Capcom made the decision to have Ryu and Ken's fighting system more rooted in reality. The marketing materials such as strategy guides published in Electronic Gaming Monthly stated that they practice Shotokan karate. This is a real-world karate style developed by Okinawan karateka Gichin Funakoshi, whom lived from 1868 to 1957, and is perhaps the most widely taught system of the martial art around the world. Sean's inclusion in the overall series has some contended history as well. For a game with characters that each have between 700 and 1200 frames of animation running at 60 frames per second, this according to an official Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection retrospective video, some characters were scrapped midway or even late into development of New Generation, making Sadamoto and his team scramble for alternatives. This led to fan lore that Ryu and Ken were never supposed to be in the game, or that they were only added after fans were angry during early location tests, or that Sean was the only Shoto meant to be in the Street Fighter III series to begin with. Stories tend to differ on this, and have changed over time. From what we know, though, New Generation didn't start as an official Street Fighter game during development, according to Akira Akiman Yasuda in an interview in the Undisputed Street Fighter, so it's logical to assume that Ryu and Ken weren't in the initial planning. According to the Sadamoto CFN interview, though, Sean was never meant to be in the game at all. But since they couldn't finish Hugo in time for New Generation's release, we can infer that he was cobbled together from Ryu and Ken animations. Sadamoto states in the same interview, though, that he was originally only going to have Ryu in the game, period, and Ken was added further into development to fill gaps. What we can ultimately glean, then, is that fans have labored under the belief for years that Ryu and Ken were only added to the Street Fighter III games after angry mobs at location tests for New Generation demanded their inclusion. The reality sums up a little like this. New Generation did not start as a Street Fighter game, so Ryu was eventually planned to be involved, and that Ken and Sean were plugged in as development continued onward due to time constraints. Ask any game dev, and they can tell you that this is not an uncommon story. As an afterthought of an afterthought, then, you can almost see how Sean was destined from the start, handicap character notwithstanding, to never be taken seriously. Not unlike series colleague Dan, whom Sean actually gives a shout out to in his New Generation win quotes. He makes for something of an interesting thought experiment, though. What would a close-range Shoto play like? With the parry system, the Street Fighter III series certainly alters the use and effectiveness of projectiles compared to games like Street Fighter II and its various clones. So taking one away from a mainstay like Ryu and Ken, but keeping a mostly similar moveset, can make for a fascinating character. But Sean's trajectory as the Street Fighter III series continued is a tragedy in 3 acts. He certainly began as a low-tier character in New Generation, but with adjustments made in Second Impact, Sean rose to Street Fighter godhood and is considered one of the 2 best characters in the game, complete with a bug for super fast meter gain and super arts that can be linked out of most of his normal move arsenal. Many of these normals were cut and pasted from Ryu and Ken, like his standing hard punch and hard kicks, and lo, Sean was ideal for fast play that rewarded a certain sense of aggression. Third Strike, then, brought him full circle and back to his weakened, plodding play. The thought experiment, at least the way that he was tuned for one specific game, was a success. Too much of one, in fact. Poor Sean. This is all the more sad because in a vacuum, Sean has some interesting things going for him as far as his moves are concerned. His standing punches are exactly like his Shoto brethren until we get to his hard punch. However, even though it's a downward haymaker like Alex, it can be blocked low and doesn't count as an overhead. His close hard punch is the normal Shoto uppercut to the jaw. Standing kicks are a bit different. He shares a light kick with his clones, but has a strange low attacking medium kick button. It can't be comboed into anything, it can be blocked low or high, but scoots him forward a little bit. Standing hard kick is different from Second Impact, where it was a move pulled from Ken, making its only use now as something of an anti-air poke. The close variation of it, though, is a good move to combo specials and supers. The low attacks are where things get terrible for Sean, albeit subtly. All of his crouching buttons have the same animations and limitations as Ryu, Ken, and Akuma, but with slower active and recovery animation frames for medium and hard kick, meaning that blocking or even taking the force of his low-medium kick makes him vulnerable to a reactive opponent at top level. This makes him mathematically awful for students of the game that count frames of animation. But Sean's other moves are nothing if not without further quirks. His rolling Sobat kick, which is executed by pressing toward the opponent in hard kick, can hop over low attacks like his universal overhead, but will often miss crouching opponents. However, it technically counts as a launcher, as a fast super art can be comboed out of it. Going against some of what I said earlier, his taunt technically works like a projectile. The ball comes in and homes in on the opponent from a high arc. It only does 1 point of damage and counts as a special move, so it can end a round with chipping a blocking opponent. But unlike a Hadoken toss from across the screen, Sean players use this as a close or mid-range combo setup. Incidentally, the colors on the ball are that of the American Basketball Association and not any Brazilian or even Japanese basketball league. The ABA was a professional basketball league founded in 1967 that merged with the National Basketball Association in 1976 to form what is the NBA that we know of today. Sean has two chaining target combos, though one of them bends the meaning of the term a bit. A close hard punch can immediately follow into his headbutt overhead by pressing toward the opponent and the hard punch button again. All three hits won't combo, but can be used as a nice fake out. The second, more often used target combo is a close medium punch into standing hard kick, which will hit low. This is interesting to point out because characters have more frames of hit stun animation when they're hit while crouching, and take slightly more damage as well, so high-level link combos are generally used against opponents being hit low. Sean can use this target combo to link some super arts as he could in Second Impact, but the timing is much more strict for things like this in Third Strike. Sean has a unique somersault move executed by a quarter circle back and a punch button, the strength of which dictates the distance traveled. It has several invincibility frames of animation, which makes it a good escape tool. He can be thrown out of it though if an opponent sniffs it out, so there's a consequence to using it. This will be something of a trend. Sean's Tornado is not unlike the classic Tatsumaki Senpukyaku of other Shoto characters. Executed by a quarter circle back with a kick button, the strength of the button extends the move and the amount of hits, with the EX version dealing the most hits and damage. It can often hit low. His wheel kick, or sometimes dragon's tail kick according to some Japanese strategy guides, hops a short distance upward and forward depending on the strength of the button pressed to punish projectile-happy opponents. This can be done with a quarter circle forward and a kick button. The EX version will home in on an opponent and hit multiple times. Sadly, this move doesn't combo out of anything. The real problem with both of these moves is that they're unsafe while blocked, but also unsafe in many situations on hit, making them very risky moves to employ. Like many changes in the transition from Second Impact to Third Strike, this wasn't the case for either move in the previous game. Sean's tackle is similarly high risk. By inputting a half circle forward and punch buttons, he'll rush the opponent on the ground and holding the punch button will grab them for a quick ground pound, the EX variation offering more damage. Sean players can use this like the roll to zoom out of trouble or close the distance on a player caught napping. Blocking the grab though makes him wide open for an easy punish. Finally, for his special moves we have the Dragon Smasher, Sean's variation on the other Shoto's Shoryuken. Sadly, this is one of his greatest heartbreaks from the transition from Second Impact to Third Strike. In the previous game, Sean would catch an opponent with this upward moving technique and add insult to injury with an extra dunk at the end. Here, not only does he lose the second hit, but the forward momentum and startup time receives significant downgrades, meaning that it will sometimes even drop in a combo if done from too great a distance. It's still a high damage move though, with an EX variation adding an additional hit. Sean's Hado Burst is generally considered his best super art, if only because it comes cheap to execute and can be stocked up to 3 times. Basically a single fireball, he can find many ways to combo into it easily for some quick damage, though it's not exactly on the high side. Contrasting this is the Shoryu Cannon, which is a highly damaging move, but at a higher meter cost. He can stock 2 of them though, so there is more opportunities for EX moves, and when connecting in the corner, Sean can juggle a bit afterward, so there are players that find this superior to Super Art 1. A full 2 stocks of this can juggle a super into a super, a quirk of Third Strike's game engine. As users like Bafale have found, moves in this game have an invisible juggle counter under the hood, and moves that can juggle will bounce an opponent around up to 5 or 6 times normally. The reality is that whenever an opponent is juggled, the hurt box on them shrinks so fewer moves can connect in succession without each hit being very close together. Some super arts like the Shoryu Cannon can reset the juggle counter though, allowing for some spectacularly hurtful combinations of moves at the expense of most of the player's resources. Lastly, his Super Art 3 is the Hyper Tornado. With a startup exactly like his tackle move, Sean will perform a combo that may drop and can be punished if the first attack is blocked. While this grants the most raw damage of the 3 super arts and was of course the most widely used in Second Impact due to Sean's stronger normal moveset, it's the least desirable super in his game. Maybe that's indicative of Sean overall though. Strong individual moves hampered by a variety of caveats. Certainly there are normals, specials, and super arts in this game that come with their share of downsides, but the amount heaped upon this one character makes him perhaps the worst one in the game. He has his fans, and the legacy of Sean's appearance in other games can generate some fond memories if a player wants to dig through the relative obscurity of Second Impact. But not to put too fine a point on it, Sean's greatest lasting impact is that of a poster child for dramatic course correction. He shined bright, but burned too hot too fast for this series. Poor, poor Sean.